So I'm about a year overdue on this, but I was finally able to pick up a copy of the Graaf Generator Charisma Years box set, which compiles everything they did for Charisma Records between 1970 and 1978, which is all of their classic material, aside from the debut album. Now, obviously, I have all these albums. I mean, most of these, I've already bought 2 or 3 times in my life. But these are newly remastered editions. They include new stereo mixes of 4 of the albums, plus new surround sound mixes of those same 4 albums. There's also some new live material, which is great because there aren't really a lot of recordings of the classic lineup of the band. And there's a Blu-ray with all the available video footage from that time. Now, I should mention, of course, that they've also put on there all the songs from the BBC sessions as bonus tracks, though that might be less thrilling if you already own the After the Flood set compiling all the BBC tracks, which I did, but it is still proof of how comprehensive it is. So I just wanted to talk about my impressions of the set today, and I'm also going to play a few clips of the new masters and the new mixes, just to give everybody a sense of how they compare, if you're trying to figure out whether or not that the new versions of that material actually makes it worthwhile for you to put the money out for the set. As always, I'm Hans from Electric Brain, Electric Shadow. We are a contemporary art rock project that's interested in melody and texture and making work that is accessible but complex. Look us up on Bandcamp or your favorite streaming service. So from a packaging standpoint, I think it's quite satisfying. You've probably been able to tell most of this from the pictures, but this is a really big, solid, beautiful piece of work. The box itself is a really nice, high-quality cardboard. The booklet is a hardcover booklet that's really, I think, as good as anything that I've seen from this type of set. Has a very good essay that gives you a lot of interesting interviews, has great archival photos, and it feels very heavy and durable. The booklet really would be just a great thing to own on its own terms, frankly. I don't know if this is a criticism exactly, but I would say that the accessibility level of the discs maybe isn't ideal if you wanted to take the set to the office or listen to it in the car. This big folding sleeve isn't really portable or convenient compared to, for instance, the 3-disc packages in the King Crimson box sets that I've been talking about recently, or the individual cardboard sleeves that a lot of smaller sets will give you. I do understand why they would choose this packaging. It's fairly classy, it looks good, and it is, I'd imagine, probably better from a budget standpoint than the individual digipacks. So, it's efficient and it does feel quality. It does make it a little hard to do anything with the discs other than, listen to them at home. I guess you could argue that would make sense for a set that is designed to encourage a more contemplative listening experience among people who are already familiar with the material. If you don't know Graaf Generator and you want to spend $200 or so on this set, I'd certainly encourage it, but realistically speaking, if you're not super familiar with the band, it might be wiser to pick up copies of a few of the best regarded albums off eBay. You can probably get copies of the 2005 remasters for fairly cheap. That's a good way to get acquainted with the music. So personally, I wonder if maybe the set is aimed much more at the longtime fan, and that's part of why it's packaged the way it is. So the bulk of what's here is a new set of remasters of the studio albums, plus their live album, Vital. And these are, I suppose, going to replace, potentially in a lot of people's collections, the 2005 remasters, which up until now is probably how most people would have this music if they're not vinyl collectors. It's how I have most of my Van der Graaf. Now, I'm not a trained audio engineer. I'm not super articulate on this topic, but, the differences between this and the 2005 remasters are immediately pretty evident if you just kind of look at them visually. Before I play anything, you can see that the new masters are actually quieter on the whole and also have more dynamic range. So seems like the folks who did this remaster and who put this set together have probably been aware of a lot of the commentary about the loudness wars. And, the sense that I have is that fans of vintage progressive rock in particular tend to really be interested in masters that are overall kind of more quieter, more dynamic. and less compressed. That's a particular topic of focus in that community, and it seems like that preference has really been reflected here. I'm just going to play a couple side-by-sides here. So here's the 2005 remaster of Killer. Here's the new remaster. Here's the 2005 remaster of Sleepwalkers. Here's the new remaster. Obviously, between these two, it's going to be down to personal preference, which you like more. To me, listening to these newer versions kind of makes the 2005 remasters seem a little bit kind of breathless and overinflated, whereas the new masters feel a little bit more inviting, a little bit more textured. But I would think that, wouldn't I? Because I just spent a bunch of money on them. So if you are someone who likes things that are mastered in a little bit more of a subtle way, if the 2005 version seemed a little bit over loud to you, this is, I think, a nice alternative, and made some reasonable difference to me just in terms of kind of being able to really settle into the music while I was listening to it. Now, I'll probably keep my copies of the 2005 editions to use in the car, right? I mentioned earlier that this packaging isn't really very good for things like car trips. Individual jewel cases are much better, and this kind of louder, more kind of inflated master actually works pretty well for the car. It's pretty well set up for that sonic environment. So the new version is a little bit better set up for kind of attentive home listening. The 05 masters are a little bit better for things like road trips, and I've actually found that Graaf Generator makes very good road trip music, despite what some people might assume. I read some reviews, I read some background material ahead of time. I didn't really find too much, though, about the goals of the remixes or about people's responses to them. So I went into that part of this set relatively blind, if that's, I guess, not mixing the metaphor for music. And, I recognize that some people might be negatively disposed to any kind of remixes. If you've been listening to a particular version for 30 or 40 years, any kind of change might be jarring, and that's totally reasonable. The way I feel about it is, the experience of music is a little bit different every time anyway, right? You might listen on different speakers or a different set of headphones, or your concentration kind of wanders in and out during a particular time. So it's really never quite the same album twice. I remember I had a friend once, if you'll pardon the digression, but I had a friend once who fell in love with the Slayer album Hell Awaits, based on listening to a cassette that he had found in his basement in his car. And his car only had left channel speakers, right? Now, Hell Awaits, of course, it's an album where you have a lot of different twin guitar lines that are playing different things, panned left and right. So he's basically only hearing half the album. So he kind of fell in love with an album that in some sense didn't really exist. The point of that just being, music is a little bit different every time you listen to it anyway, and something like a new mix like this I actually find very intriguing. So in general, the new mixes are a little bit louder, they're a little bit fuller. It's not surprising to me now, having heard the new mixes, it's not surprising that the remasters are a little bit quieter, because it does, among other things, emphasize the difference between the two mixes a little bit better, right? The original mixes, I think, have this quality of being both noisy and at the same time spacious, right? This is sonically very abrasive music, but at the same time, it's often mixed in this kind of transparent way where there's a lot of what kind of feels like a lot of empty space. The drums in particular tend to be actually quite small relative to how ferocious Evans is as a player. And the new mixes tend to give a little bit more weight and intensity to a lot of things. They tend to be a little bit wetter. They do tend to take up a little bit more space, though they, at the same time, to me at least, they don't feel overcompressed or airless in the same way that I was kind of accusing the 2005 masters of sounding. Now, as you'd expect, the new mixes also tend to make certain elements more noticeable, which might once have been hidden, but they make sure to do that while not burying any of the parts that you've gotten accustomed to hearing. They also tend to accent aspects of the flow or construction of the song in ways that accent the momentum or the overall up and down shapes of the songs, which I think can be pretty helpful in some places. Reading the booklet for this set, you really get a vivid sense of how much Van der Graaf were pushing in their time against the limits of what could be done with the recording and mixing technology that they had, right? Pawn Hearts in particular was just one kind of big attempt to push the envelope in regards to what you could put together in the studio format. And of course, the equipment that's available now is able to deal with that a little bit more easily. So it was interesting to see what could be done with newer technology with those tracks. So I just want to go through a couple examples here. There were quite a few that struck me when I was listening to the new mixes, and I did listen to most of the tracks side by side between the old and new mixes. So there are quite a lot of moments that I thought were interesting, but I want to pull out the ones that I think are the most representative for one reason or another. First is the song Lost. If you listen to this chaotic bit about 3 minutes in, first I'm going to play the original mix. Now the new mix. So the new mix really makes that bit more sonically abrasive in a way that kind of emphasizes the shock of that moment when that section comes in. In the song Pioneers Over Sea, they've made the mix wetter in a way that really kind of helps increase the immersive quality of the piece. And at the same time, they've brought out a lot of little sonic details in the arrangement that might have been hidden or blended before. So check out this passage. First in the original mix. What last brief whisper in our loved ones' ears to reassure them and to pierce the fear. Then in the new mix. What last brief whisper in our loved ones' ears to reassure them and to pierce the fear. So you can kind of hear better in the new mix how the vocal layers are put together, right? If you're someone who's interested in really kind of thinking about the details of the construction of this music, these mixes are often better positioned to kind of enable you to do that than the old mixes were. Now, the song Plague of Lighthouse Keepers, of course, that's exactly the kind of thing that would benefit from this treatment. So, for instance, check out this moment near the beginning. Here's the original mix. I prophesy disaster, and then I count the cost. Here's the new mix. I prophesy disaster, and then I count the cost. So that deep saxophone note that Jackson is playing there, I think it's a saxophone, it doesn't even totally register consciously in the original, right? In the new mix, it sounds like a foghorn. And this is actually, honestly, that particular passage, that's a place where they've really kind of brought something forward enough to kind of change the character of listening to it a bit, right? That is an example of something that might, to some people's tastes, maybe even transform the song a little bit too much if you're very familiar with and very comforted by the original. But again, to me, it really kind of increases the dynamics and the immersion of the piece in a way that I really enjoyed. Now with God Bluff, the remixes here allow Evan's drums to have just a bit more punch, which is great because the drum performance on that album is absolutely top-notch. And there's a new sense of kind of sonic fullness to a lot of what Jackson plays, particularly the woodwinds. So listen to the difference in these two clips from Sleepwalkers. First, the original. Senses dim in semi-sentience, only wheeling through this plane. Then the new mix. Senses dim in semi-sentience, only wheeling through this plane. So the new mix there, it just kind of soars in a very effective way, right? The difference is relatively subtle, but still completely striking at the same time. The album Still Life, of course, is a bit more fully arranged than God Bluff. It's already a little bit more of a sonically dense album than God Bluff. And you can really hear a big difference in some places on this album. Check out this example from the song In My Room. Here's the original mix. Here's the remix. So in the original mix of that, the bass guitar is really kind of by far the most present element, kind of dominates things a bit, even though it's maybe the most sonically conventional part of the arrangement. In the new mix, you have much more of a swirl of sound. You're hearing and noticing things that might have been buried before, particularly that kind of high-pitched feedback drone, which I don't know if I'd ever consciously registered before, and is a wonderful little piece of atmosphere. So this song in particular, actually, I have to admit, really feels transformed in to me, a fairly positive way. So ultimately, these new mixes, to my ears, they shed some really interesting light on the songs. They present them in, I think, a really very flattering light, while at the same time, retaining, I think, a basic loyalty to the clear intention of what the music is supposed to sound like. So I was really pleased with the new mixes. I might even say that for me, they're probably the strongest selling point of the album, of the set, and probably will be my go-to version for listening to these albums, at least in the near future. Now, the live material is something else that I was very excited about when this set arrived, because there's not really a definitive live album of that classic four-man lineup. There's Vital, of course, but that's very much its own thing. And, there's some live pieces and some live video pieces and some BBC sessions. But there's not really, a live album with the four-man crew. Now, the first of these live discs is a show in Milan, Italy. A little bit of this has appeared previously as bonus tracks on the 2005 versions. And the sound quality here, honestly, is not very good. It's kind of hard to imagine listening to this for pleasure rather than just scholarly interest because of that sound. It is mostly audible, particularly Hamill and Jackson. Those two players kind of make out the best in the overall arrangement. But the quality is really below a threshold, to my ears at least, where it's hard to appreciate or say much about the performances. If you're a seasoned bootleg listener, you may have a different response than I did. It's certainly better than nothing. I'm glad it exists for archival purposes. I don't know if I can imagine revisiting it all that often. Now, discs 9 and 10 are a full concert from Paris around the time of World Record. And this is one of the highlights of the sets for me. It's a great set list with a good balance of a lot of the best songs from the second era of the band. It's got several pieces that have sections that have some room for improv, such as the intros to Arrow and When She Comes, or the jam section in Mergiless 3. So you have, some improvised material there, which is always great in a live setting. It's not perfect sound quality. Jackson tends to distort a bit when he's doing some of the louder stuff. It's a little muffled in places. The sound travels between channels a bit. There's some clicking in a couple of the quiet parts. I'm not an expert on bootleg sound quality, but my sense is it's probably about what you'd call a B- quality-wise, which is, good enough quality to listen to and enjoy, but it does take a couple songs for your ears to kind of settle into it and to kind of stop noticing the sonic barrier between you and the music. Once you do, though, it's a great set. Everyone in the band is playing in top form. The energy is amazing. The material is wonderful. Hamill is, of course, a very dynamic singer. And frankly, if the sound quality had been a bit better, this would be truly revelatory and one of the essential things in the catalog, maybe even. As it is, it really is a treat for fans, and I think much more something that I'll come back to listen to a lot relative to the Italy disc. To be totally fair, the last 3 or 4 songs, they do run out of gas a little bit. You can really tell that they've just given it everything during a long show and they're getting kind of tired, especially Hamill. Sleepwalkers, in particular, which comes near the end of the set, they sound kind of exhausted on that. And Jackson, for some reason, gets very quiet, is barely audible. So you give a little bit of a foretaste of the trisector lineup there, I suppose. But if anything, I think some of that exhaustion that you can hear in the last 3 or so songs really is just a testament to how much of themselves they've been giving to this incredibly complex, challenging music, and kind of a testament to how hard they're working during the first 80% of the show. Now, as far as the surround sound mixes go, honestly, I only got surround sound capability on my own setup a few months ago. I'm not really any kind of expert at judging it, and I don't know if I can speak credibly to how those came out. Of course, I found the surround sound mixes enjoyable. If anything, it kind of felt like H to He and Pawn Hearts had a bit more to gain from that setup because they are such sonically detailed albums. They feel constructed in the studio a bit more than God Bluff and Still Life, which feel a bit more like documents of live playing. So I found those later two a little bit less intriguing in that sound, the surround sound context. If you're somebody who's into surround sound and you like Van der Graaf, then this will probably motivate you to buy the set no matter what. If you're not, it doesn't really matter. Now, the video content is all available on YouTube, at least as of this recording, so from a cost-benefit standpoint, certainly would not be wise of you to buy this set just for the video content, but if you do buy the set, then of course the Blu-ray is a pretty good excuse to sit down and take in all that video content. Now, the release of this did seem to have led to the release of some new video material. So, even if you can find these things on YouTube, my sense is they wouldn't be on YouTube were it not for this set, if I'm understanding correctly. And the new video stuff that's been unearthed is pretty great, frankly. The Beat Club recording of the songs Darkness and Whatever Would Robert Have Said just blew my mind. Really, really great. These are from 1970. The band is just so impossibly young looking. The sound is full and heavy. Hamill is absolutely shredding, as intense a performance as I've heard from him, at least during this era. And oddly enough, his look and his moves almost kind of give me Robert Plant vibes. It's strangely sexy for experimental progressive rock. Even if you don't buy the set, I would absolutely look that up on YouTube. Give it a watch if you haven't already. Now, there's some material from French TV from, I think, about 72, if I remember right. And it looks like it's H to E era stuff, so maybe 71. There's some French TV material that's a bit frustrating in that, as with a lot of TV stuff from this time, the songs are incomplete. There's other footage mixed in between the performance clips. It's not the ideal documentary that you would want. And it also seems like they only had one cameraman, and he's just kind of rushing around to whoever seems to be doing the most interesting thing at a given time. In spite of all that, it's still a pretty good documentary of the experience of being in a live setting with this band in the very early 70s. So it's great fun to watch. Again, certainly worth looking up even if you don't buy the set. Now, the Belgian TV material, of course, that's been out for a few years. The set says this is the first official release, but I don't know if that makes a huge difference, frankly. I did already have it on what I suppose was a bootleg DVD. The promotional videos are fun, but they're not earth-shaking. And the Austrian TV material is kind of less appealing than the early stuff from a video and audio quality standpoint. This is kind of a nitpick, but I'm a little surprised that the Time Vaults material didn't make it into this set. Anybody who buys this, frankly, is probably already going to have Time Vaults, and, if somebody's new to Van der Graaf and is buying this set, then that's the last thing I'd recommend that they listen to. But, just from the standpoint of whether or not this is, in fact, a truly comprehensive document of this era, I suppose this omission makes it more like 97% comprehensive. just from the standpoint of total completism. It's not the end of the world, but it is something that seems worth noting, particularly since a lot of the sound quality on Time Vaults is kind of dire. I suppose I get the sense from reading the liner notes to that release that they don't have any of the original tapes or anything, so maybe there's nothing they could have done to improve it. Maybe that's why it doesn't appear here. So overall, the set offers, I think, a notably superior way to hear the original mixes. It offers the new mixes, which I think are really going to be a treat for longtime fans of the material, assuming that you're able to kind of cope with a little bit of change. The Paris concert is excellent, and the Blu-ray is great to have in case, YouTube servers ever crash or Charisma becomes a lot tighter about copyright or something like that. And, there really is, I think, something satisfying about having this run of absolutely world-class material combined in this beautiful package, even if a lot of the contents are fairly familiar already. So yeah, to answer the question in the title, for me it was definitely worth the cost. I'd recommend it to anyone who's inclined to consider picking it up. All right, thanks much everybody for your time. Next week I'll be getting to the end of the Genesis song ranked list. And yeah, that'll be fun, I'm sure. Hope you have a good week, and I'll talk to everyone later.